A dead man already told you this was coming, and Lil Durk's own people made sure nobody remembered it until now. Years before the indictments dropped. Years before the federal courthouse in Atlanta became the most terrifying address in Chicago rap. Years before OTF members were sitting across from prosecutors and allegedly agreeing to say whatever needed to be said to walk free, Fredo Santana looked into a camera and said something so specific, so surgical, so uncomfortably close to what is happening right now in 2025, that when that clip resurfaced, the people closest to Durk went completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silent that only happens when someone says something that is true and everyone in the room knows it. So let me ask you something. If your closest friend, someone who had been in the trenches with the same people now allegedly testifying against you, if that friend sat down years ago and basically described the exact collapse you're living through right now, would you say that was a coincidence? Or would you say that man saw something in these people that you refused to see? Because here is what nobody in these streets is willing to say out loud right now. Fredo Santana did not just predict this. According to sources close to the original OTF inner circle, Fredo allegedly expressed deep reservations, privately repeatedly, about the long-term loyalty of certain individuals in Durk's orbit. People who are now allegedly cooperating. People who stood on stages. People who wore the same chain. You need to stay right here. Because what Fredo said, and more importantly what happened after he said it, is about to change everything you thought you understood about loyalty inside the OTF circle. And once you hear this, you will never hear Durk's music the same way again. To understand why Fredo Santana's words are hitting Chicago like a freight train right now, you have to go back. Not to 2024. Not to the indictments. You have to go back to the beginning, to the raw, unfiltered Chicago drill era when loyalty was not a lyric, it was a life requirement. And the men who built that scene understood something about human nature that the music industry never wanted to admit. Fredo Santana, born Derek Coleman on July 4, 1990, was not just a rapper. He was arguably the architectural foundation of what Chicago drill became. While his younger cousin Chief Keef became the global face of the movement, people who are actually there will tell you that Fredo was the one who set the temperature. He was the one who understood the rules. And he was the one who, according to people who knew him personally, spoke about loyalty with a precision that bordered on prophecy. He died on January 19, 2018, at just 27 years old, from a seizure linked to prolonged complications from lean addiction, liver and kidney failure that his body had been fighting for over a year. He left behind music, a legacy, and allegedly, a series of conversations and recorded moments in which he said things about the Chicago circle, things about who could be trusted, and things about what happens when money, fame, and federal pressure all arrive at the same time, that are now being circulated with an urgency that nobody can ignore. And here is where it gets interesting. The specific clip that is making rounds right now, the one that allegedly made multiple OTF-affiliated accounts go dark within 48 hours of it resurfacing, is not a diss track. It is not an interview. According to sources who claim to have seen the full version, it is a candid, unguarded moment where Fredo allegedly discusses the concept of what happens to circles when the stakes get high enough. He allegedly talks about how loyalty is easy when everyone is broke and hungry together, but the real test, the one most people fail, is when one person gets big enough that the others start calculating their own position. He allegedly said, and this is reportedly a near verbatim account from someone who claims to have been in the room, the ones that smile the hardest at you in public are always the first ones counting down the seconds in private. Now let that sit there for a second. Because that sentence, allegedly spoken by a man who has been dead since 2018, is being applied right now to a situation that did not fully materialize until 2024, when Lil Durk, born Durk Derek Banks, was arrested by U.S. Marshals and charged with federal murder-for-hire conspiracy allegedly connected to a plot targeting none other than Quando Rondo. Stay right here because it gets worse. The federal indictment that dropped in October 2024 did not just name Durk. It named a coordinated network. It named individuals described in court documents as OTF-affiliated operatives who allegedly chartered flights, rented vehicles using OTF-linked credit accounts, and allegedly orchestrated a surveillance operation on Quando Rondo that reached all the way to California. OTF Didi, formerly charged as part of this conspiracy, was specifically identified as allegedly being the on-the-ground executor of this alleged murder-for-hire operation. Let me give you the timeline because you need to understand how deep this goes. November 6th, 2020. Atlanta, Georgia. Outside the Monaco Hookah Lounge. A confrontation erupts between King Von's crew and a group connected to Quando Rondo. Gunshots are fired. King Von, Davon Daquan Bennett, Durk's closest friend, his brother in every sense that mattered, is shot and killed. He is 26 years old. The man standing next to Quando Rondo when the shooting starts, a man named Timothy Leaks, also known as Lul Tim, is later charged with King Von's murder. Durk's response to that night was documented publicly. The grief was real. The music he made in the aftermath, the voice, the tributes, the performances where he broke down on stage, none of that was performance. People who were with him in those weeks say they had never seen a man carry that kind of weight and still keep moving. But underneath that grief, according to sources close to the situation, something else was building. Something operational. Something that allegedly involved multiple members of the OTF circle sitting down and making decisions that would eventually lead all roads back to a federal courtroom. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because while the world was watching Durk mourn publicly, allegedly, internally, the circle was already moving. OTF Didi and others reportedly began tracking Quando Rondo's movements. According to federal documents, flights were booked. Cars were rented. Credit cards connected to OTF financial accounts were allegedly used to fund what prosecutors are describing as a coordinated murder-for-hire operation stretching across multiple states. Now Fredo Santana allegedly once said something to the effect of, "When the feds get involved, you find out real fast that most people only ride until they got something to lose." And that sentence, allegedly spoken years before any of this happened, is exactly what Chicago is whispering about right now. The question that is burning through Chicago right now is not whether the operation happened. The question is, who exactly is doing the talking? That question has names attached to it. Names that were once posted on OTF social media. Names that were once in music videos standing next to Durk. Names that are now allegedly attached to cooperation agreements, plea negotiations, and government witness lists that, if accurate, would represent one of the most significant implosions of any rap circle in the last decade. Let us be precise about what the public record actually shows, and then let us talk about what sources close to the situation are allegedly saying happened behind closed doors. By early 2025, rumors had begun circulating, first on Twitter, then on Instagram, then bleeding into mainstream hip-hop commentary, that multiple OTF affiliates had allegedly cooperated or were in negotiations to cooperate with federal prosecutors in connection with a murder-for-hire case against Lil Durk. These rumors were not born in a vacuum. They were reportedly fueled by people who claimed to have direct knowledge of grand jury proceedings, court filings, and private conversations between defense attorneys and individuals who were themselves facing serious federal time. Now here is the twist. OTF Jam, a figure who had been publicly affiliated with the OTF circle for years, became one of the first names directly attached to the cooperation narrative. In videos that began circulating online, OTF Jam allegedly appeared to acknowledge distancing himself from the situation in ways that, according to observers, suggested he was no longer operating under the assumption that OTF would protect him if things went sideways. Sources allegedly claim that Jam was not just distancing himself socially. He was allegedly navigating a legal position that placed him in direct conflict with Durk's defense interests. Reportedly, according to insiders, Durk's legal team became aware of the alleged cooperation narrative surrounding Jam and others, and the response from Durk's camp was, allegedly, one of controlled fury. Sources claim that Durk, from inside federal detention where he has been held without bond since his October 2024 arrest, allegedly expressed profound feelings of betrayal through intermediaries, through his attorneys, and through carefully worded social media posts that his team managed on his behalf. But stay right here because it gets worse. OTF Vonnie, another figure named in connection with the King Von murder-for-hire conspiracy, reportedly became a central figure in the alleged cooperation conversation. The social media post that surfaced in early 2025 claiming that Vonnie's father had publicly stated his son would cooperate with federal authorities sent a shockwave through Chicago and the broader rap internet that has not fully settled even now. Whether that post was accurate, whether it was strategically planted, whether it was a misunderstanding or a deliberate signal, none of that has been definitively confirmed. But word on the street is that the post said enough. It said enough that multiple OTF-affiliated accounts were scrubbed, that certain long-standing social media relationships were quietly severed, and that the conversation inside Durk's circle shifted from grief to survival in a way that Fredo Santana allegedly predicted years ago. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Fredo Santana was not a peripheral figure in early OTF energy. He was connected to that entire Chicago drill ecosystem in ways that gave him a ground-level view of how loyalty functioned, and how it failed, in environments where the stakes were existential. According to people who grew up in that same Chicago South Side corridor, Fredo had a reputation for being the one who said uncomfortable truths. He was not diplomatic. He was allegedly the person who, when everyone else was celebrating and posting, would pull someone aside privately and say the thing that needed to be said but that nobody wanted to hear. The clip that is now circulating, the one that allegedly prompted the silence, reportedly shows Fredo making observations about loyalty that are so specific in their framing that people watching it in 2025 are allegedly stopping the video mid-sentence and texting each other the timestamp. Sources who claim to have seen the extended version of the clip allege that Fredo specifically talked about what happens when you build your circle in a crisis, when everyone comes together around a shared enemy or shared grief, and how that kind of bonding is powerful but also fragile in a specific way, because it is built on emotion rather than tested character. He allegedly said something to the effect of, "You can't know somebody in peace. You only know somebody when everything is on fire. And even then, you only really know them when the fire is aimed at them personally." Now apply that sentence to OTF in 2025. King Von's death was a crisis that bonded people together. The alleged murder-for-hire operation that followed was built on the emotional foundation of that crisis. But when the fire shifted from the outside to the inside, when it was no longer Quando Rondo who was the threat but the United States federal government, allegedly, reportedly, according to multiple sources close to the situation, the bonds that were forged in grief began to show exactly the fracture lines that Fredo allegedly described years before any of this happened. Let us talk about OTF Didi specifically. Because Didi is not a peripheral name in this story. Federal documents allege that Didi was a primary operational figure in the murder-for-hire conspiracy. That he allegedly flew to California. That rental cars were allegedly secured in his name or through accounts connected to his operation. That he allegedly conducted surveillance on Quando Rondo with a level of operational planning that, prosecutors allege, could not have been self-funded or self-directed. The implication, and this is what sources close to the legal proceedings are allegedly discussing, is that Didi was allegedly executing instructions that came from a higher level within the alleged organizational structure. And if Didi is now, allegedly, in any kind of communication with federal prosecutors, the information he allegedly possesses is not peripheral. It is allegedly central. It is allegedly the kind of information that a federal case of this magnitude is built around. According to insiders with claimed knowledge of the case, the government's alleged position is that Durk was not merely aware of the operation. The government allegedly claims he was the directing authority behind it, the person who allegedly gave the order, provided the resources, and then retreated to a position of deniability while associates allegedly carried out the mission. Durk's legal team has publicly pushed back on this framing aggressively. His attorneys have described the charges as politically motivated and factually unsupported. They have argued that the government is allegedly building a case on the testimony of individuals who have their own criminal exposure and are therefore allegedly willing to say whatever the government needs them to say to reduce their own sentences. The story is not just about whether Durk is guilty or innocent. The story, the deeper, more disturbing story, is about what Fredo Santana allegedly understood about the architecture of loyalty in this specific kind of circle. Because if Fredo's words are as prophetic as the people sharing that clip are claiming, then the question is no longer just about OTF. The question becomes, did Durk know on some level that the people around him were built for crisis but not built for consequence? Did he know what Fredo allegedly knew and choose the circle anyway? Or did he believe, genuinely, that this circle was different? Because those two possibilities lead to two completely different understandings of everything that has happened since November 6, 2020. Fredo Santana's alleged prophecy means for the legacy of an entire generation of Chicago music, and about what the silence from the people who knew both men best is actually telling us. Let us start with the silence itself. Because silence in the rap world is communication. When someone who was loud goes quiet, that is a statement. When someone who posted every day suddenly stops, that is a statement. When an entire circle of people who have microphones, platforms, millions of followers, and every reason in the world to defend their brother, collectively decides to say nothing, that says more than anything they could have said out loud. Since the Fredo clip resurfaced, according to sources monitoring the online activity of OTF-affiliated accounts, there has been a measurable and documented shift in posting behavior. Accounts that were regularly active, posting music, posting lifestyle content, posting loyalty rhetoric, have either significantly reduced their output or gone completely dark. Sources close to the situation allege that this is not coincidental. They allege that legal counsel has advised multiple individuals in the OTF orbit to minimize their public digital footprint in light of ongoing federal proceedings. But here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. The silence is allegedly not uniform. According to sources with claimed inside knowledge, certain individuals within the extended OTF circle have allegedly continued to communicate privately, and some of those private communications are reportedly being monitored. The federal government's capacity to surveil electronic communications, to subpoena social media records, to obtain cell tower data and cloud backup information, has allegedly already produced evidence in this case that goes beyond what has been publicly disclosed in court documents. What this means, allegedly, is that the circle, the one Fredo allegedly warned about, the one built on crisis bonding rather than tested character, is not just fracturing publicly. It is allegedly fracturing in ways that are being documented by the government in real time. Now let us talk about Quando Rondo. Because his role in this story is more complicated than the simple villain framing that OTF Energy initially assigned him, and Fredo's alleged prophecy intersects with Rondo's story in a way that nobody has fully examined. Quando Rondo, born Tiquian Terrell Boyd on March 23, 1999, in Savannah, Georgia, was by 2020 a legitimate rising star in the rap game. His connection to NBA YoungBoy gave him a platform, his music had genuine audience, and his beef with OTF, while real, was, according to multiple accounts, significantly more complicated than the public narrative suggested. The public narrative placed Quando Rondo as the aggressor, as the enemy, as the reason King Von was dead. But word on the street is that the night of November 6, 2020, was not a pre-planned assassination. Multiple people who were present or close to people who were present have allegedly described the situation as an escalation, a confrontation that started as tension and became a shooting in a matter of seconds. According to insiders, Quando Rondo has maintained privately, consistently, and allegedly in communications that became part of federal proceedings, that he did not come to Atlanta that night to kill King Von. Whether that is true or not, the legal system produced a different outcome for Lil Tim, the man charged with firing the shots that killed Von. And the grief that Durk and OTF carried from that night was, allegedly, regardless of the circumstances, the genesis of everything that followed. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Fredo Santana allegedly understood something about grief-driven decision-making that is relevant right now. According to people who were close to him in his final years, people who have allegedly shared memories of conversations with Fredo in private settings, he reportedly spoke often about how grief made people dangerous not because it made them strong, but because it made them reckless. He allegedly said something along the lines of, when you're grieving somebody you loved, you stop thinking about consequences. You stop thinking about tomorrow. And that's when people get you, because they know you'll move without calculating. Apply that sentence to October 2024, to the federal indictment, to the alleged murder-for-hire operation that federal prosecutors claim was years in the making, operationally sophisticated, and ultimately, allegedly, traceable directly back to the grief that started on November 6, 2020. If Fredo's framing is accurate, then Durk and everyone around him was allegedly operating in exactly the psychological state that Fredo warned about. Grief made them allegedly move. Moving without calculating allegedly created the paper trail. The paper trail allegedly brought the feds. And now the people who moved together are allegedly being separated, individually, into rooms where a federal prosecutor is sitting across from them with a piece of paper that has two options on it. Option 1 allegedly says, "Tell us what we need to know." Option 2 allegedly says, "Face the maximum exposure on charges that carry sentences measured in decades." Fredo Santana allegedly knew this was always going to be the test. He allegedly knew it because he had seen it happen before, in Chicago, in the streets that built both him and Durk and Chief Keef and the entire drill movement. He had allegedly seen circles that looked unbreakable get handed exactly that two-option piece of paper and watched them dissolve in real time. According to sources who claim to be deeply familiar with the OTF inner circle dynamics in the years before Durk's arrest, there was a period, reportedly around 2022 and 2023, when the legal pressure was quietly building even before the public knew about it, when Durk allegedly began to isolate. When his inner circle allegedly contracted. When people who had been fixtures around him allegedly found themselves receiving less access, fewer calls, less presence in the operational sources allege that Durk, on some level, may have sensed what was coming. Not the specific charges, not the specific names, but the general shape of the threat. The feeling, allegedly articulated to at least one trusted individual, that the circle had grown too large, that too many people knew too many things, and that in a federal investigation, knowledge is not power. Knowledge is leverage. And leverage, in the hands of the wrong person facing the wrong amount of time, becomes the thing that ends everything. Now here is the twist that lands hardest. Fredo Santana is not alive to see any of this. He cannot sit down for an interview and say, yes, this is what I meant, this is exactly the scenario I was describing. He cannot speak for himself. All that exists is the clip, the alleged conversations that people who knew him are now reconstructing from memory, and the eerie specific accuracy with which his allegedly stated observations map onto the situation unfolding in real time. But the people who loved Fredo, the people who grew up with him, who were in those rooms, who heard those conversations, are reportedly watching the news out of Atlanta and Chicago and the federal courthouse, and according to at least one person who claims to be in that category, the feeling is not one of vindication. The feeling is grief. Because being right about something like this means that the people involved are either in prison, facing prison, or allegedly helping put someone else there. And nobody wins that scenario. Nobody. 072 Boogie, the third OTF-affiliated name cited in connection with the King Von murder-for-hire case alongside Didi and Vonnie, adds another layer to this story that has been significantly underexamined in public coverage. According to sources close to the case, Boogie's alleged involvement speaks to how wide the operational network allegedly was, and how deeply embedded federal investigators allegedly were before the October 2024 arrests ever happened. The mugshots that surfaced online showing Didi, Vonnie, and Boogie together represented, for many people in Chicago, the visual confirmation of what rumor had been building toward for months. And allegedly, according to sources with claimed knowledge of the federal investigation's timeline, the government had been building this case for significantly longer than the public was aware. The October 2024 arrests were, allegedly, not the beginning of the investigation. They were the culmination of one. Which means, allegedly, that while Durk was releasing music, while OTF was posting loyalty content, while the circle was publicly presenting itself as unified and unbothered, the federal investigation was allegedly already in progress, allegedly already had cooperators, and allegedly already had information that would eventually become the foundation of the charges filed. Fredo allegedly once said, "They never come at you while you're watching for them. They wait until you think you're safe." The last question that this story opens, the one that Chicago cannot answer, the one that the rap internet is going to be debating for months, is this. If the circle allegedly folds the way that Fredo predicted it would fold, if the alleged cooperation is as deep and as damaging as sources are claiming it is, what does that mean for the music? What does that mean for the legacy? What does that mean for every song about loyalty, every line about OTF, every moment where Durk looked into a camera and said that the people around him were different, that his circle was built differently? Because the answer to that question is not in any court document. It is not in any indictment. It is in that clip. The one that is making Chicago silent. The one where a man who has been dead since January 2018 is apparently still the most honest voice in the room. Here is where we are right now. And pay attention because this story is nowhere near over. Lil Durk's trial is reportedly set for August 2026. That is over a year away. Over a year for the alleged cooperation agreements to be finalized or fall apart. Over a year for new information to surface, for legal strategies to shift, for the government's alleged witnesses to hold or crack under cross-examination. Over a year for the Fredo Santana clip to either be confirmed as prophetic or dismissed as coincidence by the people who are still alive to offer that verdict. But here is the question that has no comfortable answer. If the people who were closest to Durk, the people who allegedly moved with him, flew with him, allegedly made decisions together, if they are allegedly now the same people sitting across from federal prosecutors, what does loyalty actually mean in the world that Durk and Fredo and Vaughn and all of them built? Was it ever real? Or was it always, as Fredo allegedly suggested, conditional on circumstances that had not yet arrived? Nobody can answer that from the outside. And maybe that is the point. Right now, your like on this video is not just a number. This specific story, the Fredo prediction, the OTF circle, the federal case, is being actively suppressed on certain platforms because it names and real cases and real legal proceedings that powerful interests would prefer stayed buried in court documents that most people never read. Your like tells the algorithm that people want this information. It keeps this story visible. And I want to ask you one specific question in the comments. Not who you think is guilty. Not whether Durk did it. I want you to answer this. Was Fredo Santana the last honest man in the Chicago circle, and did everyone around him know it? Drop it below. Because that debate has no clean answer. And that is exactly why this comment section is going to be alive for days. And as for what Fredo allegedly said in the rest of that clip, the part that nobody has released publicly yet, we'll talk about that very soon.